Welcome to Ohiro's educational series on fishing. Before we get started today, I'm going to talk about some fluorocarbon. Free samples have arrived at www.ohirofishing.com. So if you go to the website, you can get some free samples of the Ohiro fluorocarbon. I've been using it for about 4 years. It definitely, by far, is the most invisible fluorocarbon on the market, and I would tell you, get a sample and tank test it for yourself, and you will see how invisible it really is. Plus, it's super abrasion resistant. Now we're going to talk about picking a rod. I'm going to start with 3 basic rods. I'm going to start with a 7-foot, which is this on my right hand, then a 7 rod and an 8-foot. And they all have, the applications of the rod are a little bit different. But yet what's nice about fishing is that you can take the 7-foot rod and do 6, which is the middle rod, the same thing that you can with the 8-foot. And you can take the 8-foot and do the same thing with the 7-foot. The variables change. They change on so many different things. The size of the line that you have on there, and here's the general rule of thumb. I told you there were no rules, but I'm giving you a general rule. If you want to throw live bait and you want to throw it really far at a distance and the bait's really small, the longer rod, which is 8-foot, is going to give you more casting distance. That's just common sense. Everybody knows that. You don't have to be taking physics to understand that the longer the rod, the farther you'll be able to throw the bait. Also, the longer the rod, the faster you'll be able to have line pickup. So in other words, if your line is down in the water and you need to pick it up and take the slack out of it, as you pick up the 8 feet, the 8-foot rod, it's going to take the line out faster. Then you have a 6-foot rod, and then you have a 7. Now, if I was throwing live baits and I want to throw them far, I would use the 8-foot because I can throw it. If I wanted to throw lures, okay, all day long, I might pick the 7-foot. And the reason I would pick the 7-foot rod is, one, the 7-foot rod is a little lighter because there's less material on it. And number 2, it's if you're working in close to docks or structure, you can handle it better. It doesn't, it's not going to be so awkward to cast with all day around close structure. So a lot of people say, if you're going to fish and you're going to throw a lot of artificials, get a 7-foot. If you're going to throw a lot of baits, get an 8-foot. Well, then why is there a 7-6? Well, maybe the 7-6 is the happy medium. If you want to throw a little bit of bait and a little bit of lures, you have a 7-foot-6 rod. Sometimes people pick rods based on the room they have on their boat. You know, if they have a tower and they would stick their 7-foot rod, doesn't stick up as high. But there's also rods that are 9 feet and 10 feet. And obviously you guys heard that there's 14-foot rods. Remember, the longer the rod, the further you cast. If you notice 14-foot rods, they're usually basically for surf casting. When you're on the surf and you want to cast 100 yards off the beach, that 14-foot rod will be able to complete the task for you. But just to show you how I can take an 8-foot rod and a 7-foot rod, and I'll tell you that the bait I will throw with the 8-foot rod will go further, I can take the variable of the 7-foot rod and throw it just as far by changing the line I have on it. So if I'm using 30-pound braid on this 8-foot, and I use 10-pound braid on this 7-foot, I might be able to throw the same bait the same distance because the line diameter and the distance that that smaller braid line will go will equal what the 8-foot can do. So you can change the variables. Now let's talk about the quality of a rod. Well, let's start with simple. Let me say this. These are spinning rods. And there's a difference between a spinning rod and a conventional rod for inshore fishing. We're not going to talk about offshore rods today. These are all inshore rods, basically for snook, reds, and trout. Now, you can use this offshore, but it's not a grouper rod. You can use it for mackerel. You can use it for some other fish offshore. But this is basically an inshore rod that's very light. It's made of a graphite. It's got big eyes. Now, let's talk. This is a spinning rod, and all spinning rods will have bigger eyes than a casting rod. So if you see the eyes on this, you'll notice how big they are. And I brought a casting rod just to show you the difference. Because the way a casting rod works and a spinning rod is completely different. The way the rod is built, from the eyes to the actual blank of where the blank is rolled, Here is a spinning rod right next to, I don't know if you can see that, to a casting rod. If you look at the eye on the casting rod, it's very, very tiny. And I'll turn it this way, maybe they can see it like that. It's very, very tiny. And the reason being, this is a spinning reel here, and it's got a wide spool, and the line comes off like this in big circular motions, and it goes through this eye. Now, if it came off in a big circular motion and you had it on a casting rod, it's going to hit the eye, and it's going to stop a lot of the line from going out. So that's why picking the proper rod, and believe it or not, I'm telling you this because people will come in and they'll buy a casting rod and put a spinning reel on it. Most casting rods inshore will have what they call a trigger. This is called a trigger, right there. That's a trigger on a casting rod. A casting reel will come, it'll be a revolving spool, it'll come straight. There's no spinning on it as far as coming off counterclockwise or clockwise. It comes straight out. That's why the eyes are small, because it comes straight through the guides. So I'm going to go back to the spinning rod. So all spinning rods will have bigger guides. So, and usually somewhere on the rod it'll tell you that it's a spinning rod. So for all you beginners out there, just look, and it'll say spinning, or in the code of the rod it'll have an S, like it'll say IS, and that IS is usually for spinning. I'll put the reel on here. It'll have a reel seat. Most reel seats just have a little clamp, and you just screw it on, and there's your reel on it. And it's simple as that. And there's your reel. Along with the rod and the spinning eyes, you'll see they get smaller and smaller, because as the line goes through, it'll get the loops will get smaller and smaller, and it'll come out and you'll cast.